So this video outlines the process of replacing the drive belt, or the serpentine belt as it's sometimes called, on the Amarok. And we also had to replace the tensioner pulley and the idle pulley. I was driving down the road and just doing 60, just a normal sort of suburban road, and the first thing I noticed was power steering disappeared and the battery light came on the dash. Now I'd seen that, or I'd heard about that before and figured, it sounds like the drive belt. So I pulled over and raised the hood, and sure enough, the drive belt had turned to spaghetti. You can drive for a while without the belt on. It's operating the power steering, so obviously you don't have any power steering, which makes things a bit heavy, and you don't have any power going to the battery because it also operates the alternator. And if it's a really hot day, you don't have air conditioning as well because it operates the compressor for that too. After we got into the car park and I took a closer look, it wasn't just the belt. In actual fact, the bearing on the tensioner pulley had completely collapsed, and the idler pulley didn't look real healthy either, and when I wobbled it had quite a bit of play in it, so clearly that had to be replaced as well. That's what the tensioner pulley is supposed to look like. That's after I've replaced it, so we'll come back to that. I don't have any video, I'm afraid. I didn't have my video camera when I was doing everything, so I'm just going to talk you through some stills that I've taken. You'll also have to excuse the state of my engine. We'd only recently been up the Wombat Forest and it virtually been submerged in mud, so if you're wondering about the colour of some of the parts, yeah, they're mud coloured. Normally speaking, they're probably more an alloy type of colour. So with a bit of help from Winchy and the PDF documents that he's uploaded onto the Amarok forum, I was able to get all of the information needed to be able to change everything there. And that just takes you step by step through with PDFs, exactly the process that you've got to go through to get it all done. So what you've got to do there is you've got to unscrew the bracket from the coolant line there and get it out of the way because it covers some of the bolt holes and also gets in your way of everything. You've also got to remove the charged pressure pipes that go over the top of the alternator. You can see that marked with the red arrow there. You get them by taking off a couple of little Torx screws, one marked there with a little red arrow and one underneath the pipes marked with the second red arrow there. After you've done those Torx screws, you can undo the hose clamps that hold that plastic length of charged pressure pipe and remove that plastic part altogether. You'll have to unhook the electric sensor that's on that pipe. Get that out of the way, and once that's out of the way, you just tuck the pipes out of the way completely, and that will expose then the alternator. Now you need to take the alternator out because the nut that holds the tensioner pulley in is at the rear of the tensioner pulley, and it's completely covered by the alternator. Now, after you've taken the connectors off the back of the alternator, as per the instructions in the PDF, you can see there's just one little nut and the electrical connection, and you take the two nuts out, the lower nut and the upper nut, as per again the PDF. Then you've got to try and get the alternator out. It's a lot harder than you might think, because the nuts that hold the alternator in are a tapered friction fit nut, which even when the bolts are out still hold the compressor in place, the alternator in place very securely. Or after you've undone the nuts a small amount, give them a tap with a hammer and try and just break that grip of those tapered friction nuts on the back so that the alternator will come out freely. Now, before taking the tensioner pulley out, you have to take the tension off it. So with a 5/8 spanner, just put that on the tensioner pulley nut and rotate the tensioner pulley around until you can line up the hole with the front face of the pulley with the hole that goes further back into the assembly, and and just pop an Allen key or some sort of pin in there to relieve the tension. Once you've got the alternator out, that'll give you access to the nut at the rear of the tensioner pulley. You can just see it there on the top of the shot. What I used was just a little ratchet spanner. I'm not sure there's enough room to get a socket in there. And it's just a matter of undoing that nut, and that will free up the tensioner pulley, and it will just come out then. You can see there the new and the old tensioner pulley. You can see that the new one is quite a bit more robust. When I ordered the part, they were aware that there'd been more than one upgrade, and they automatically supplied the new one. I didn't have to ask for the new one, but obviously if you're ordering it, make sure that you get the more robust model. What has happened in the past is they've broken. Apparently they've been reasonably weak inside the spring there. Now, putting it in is fairly simple. You just simply spop it into place, and using that ratchet spanner again, was able just to do it up just as tight as it was when I undid it. Once it's in, it's obviously time to put the alternator back in. Now, before you try and put it back into place, you've got to reposition those tapered nuts. Otherwise it'll be virtually impossible to get back into its spot. Now, to do that, you just pop the bolt back in place, leaving about 5mm, 4 or 5mm still undone, and just tap it with a hammer until the bolt sits soundly back on the alternator, and you'll find that will have popped the tapered nut out by 4 or 5mm at the back, which will give you enough space in between there to be able to pop it into position without too much hassle. So once that was back, and it's a bit tricky to get those nuts in again, but it's just a matter of persevering, and then obviously reconnecting the electricals at the back of it. I obviously also had to change the idle pulley, which you can see there is a bit dodgy. When I took it out, the bearing had begun to collapse. It had quite a bit of play in it, and probably crap had penetrated into the bearing seals, I would imagine. So the new one was obviously all good. That was just simply a case of popping off the dust cap and using a number 10 spline, just removing that the idler pulley and putting the new one on. I found that was easier to do from the bottom rather than trying to do it from the top, which is what I did. Once that was on, it's a matter of fitting the belt. A case of putting the belt in place, ignoring the idler pulley first, and lastly just tucking the belt underneath the idler pulley, and then taking the strain off it with the 5-inch ring spanner, taking out that pin and allowing the tensioner pulley to re-put the tension on the belt. Just replace the coolant line with that nut, and then pop the charge pressure pipes back. Obviously making sure that you remember that sensor cable to be put back on, to all the hose clamps back up, and the torque screws, and finally reconnecting the battery. and you're back in business with any luck. Given I did it in the car park with only a few tools, it took me about 3.5 hours. If you did happen to get it back into a workshop, you probably wouldn't take you anywhere near that long, particularly knowing that one of the biggest issues I had was getting that alternator out. Once you know to relieve the pressure from those tapered nuts, it probably wouldn't be anywhere near as difficult as I found it. If you do have to do it on the road, it doesn't really take a lot of specialist tools, but access obviously is very difficult, particularly given the fact that you can't really see a lot of the nuts that you need to take off, both at the rear of the alternator and at the front of the alternator. What I did is, as you can see, is I just used my phone to take photos of the area, and then looked at the photo and was able to then feel my way around and find those nuts. Good luck with yours. I hope it wasn't as painful as mine.